In horror films and across other genres, it is conventional for the antagonist to have the intention of killing the protagonist in the narrative, yet also the protagonist defeating and killing the antagonist. This then creates a binary opposition of good versus evil. For example, in Fright Night we see Anton Yeltsin, the protagonist, and his sidekick David Tennant defeat Colin Farrell, the vampire, and the antagonist. This is a convention Reimagine have challenged and went against to create a narrative for the audience to be surprised and not to predict to what the ending of the film would be. The false hero theory states how the main character, who seems to be the good, changes into the bad later on to the film. This is a theory challenging the conventions of the role protagonist and antagonist in films. Sakkaku's narrative is an example of supporting this theory, and in the near end of the film, the protagonist is stabbed with the mid-shell of the stomach and a hand on the knife. Then a point of view is used of the protagonist looking up from the hand with the blade and seeing that there is no one there. And slowly collapses to the ground with the last shot of the trees and branches. Which Reimagine used to replace the bird's eye view of the protagonist lying on the floor. With this shot, it is more effective as an ending because it has shown that the antagonist has left the scene. This is an example of how it fits with the false hero theory, as it starts with the protagonist running in fear and seen to be innocent, and then later on becoming a threat and a danger to herself, which then ultimately causing her own death. However, it is the audience's interpretation on who is responsible for the death of the protagonist. The theory can be applied to Woman in Black, because the antagonist, Woman in Black, has used the protagonist, Daniel Radcliffe's son, to enter the train track, which had made the protagonist risk his own life to save his son, which then has ultimately caused his own death. Levi Strauss has mentioned 8 types of binary opposites that made up the binary opposition theory. Examples are good, evil, love, hate, freedom, imprisonment, and beauty, ugly. In Sakkaku, it is clear that the role of the protagonist and the doctor supports the binary opposite of good versus evil, because it is the doctor's intention to inflict pain and harm the protagonist as part of her experiment. With the role of the protagonist who is captured and kidnapped and a doctor who is using her as an experiment, Abe, a short horror film, supports the theory because of the binary opposition of good versus evil. The 2 roles are therefore the example of binary opposition Levi Strauss mentions in his theory. There is also the binary opposition of protagonist versus antagonist. However, in the end of the film, it can be argued and seen as challenging the binary opposition of how there is just pure evil, rather than the good, because of how the protagonist just saw an illusion of her evil side and became responsible for the cause of her own death, making it self-inflicted, which again supports the false hero theory. Steve Neill mentions how genres repeat the style of how they are representing the genre and the film. This is for example how in horror there is a repetition with the use of forests and graveyards because of how dark and isolating the location is to create fear for the protagonist and for the audience. Blair Witch 2016 is an example that used the forest to create an isolated location for the characters to be in. This theory can be applied to the narrative of Sakkaku, although it is about genre. To create the narrative of horror, we filmed outside of school at the memorial location, which is a graveyard to film the scenes of where the protagonist runs in at the start of the film that is captured with a tracking shot, using a handheld camera to create the effect of disorder. The audience is relied on to be following this disorder throughout the film. This type of action is recreated in many horror films and even in music videos. One example of a product from a K-pop MV called Bad by a group called Infinite uses a tracking shot of someone running in the car park with someone who is behind chasing him. The location and the use of tracking shot depicts a genre of horror. Therefore, this part of the narrative can be considered conventional, adhering to Steve Neill's theory. The dominant male theory is based on how male protagonist is portrayed in film. They are seen to be brave, strong and intelligent, to lead their narrative, defeat and kill the antagonist. Fright Night is an example of the protagonist killing the antagonist. When the dominant male cast is for horror films, it is conventional because of how they are portrayed to be brave, strong and intelligent. This proves Steve Neill's theory on dominant male. To go against this convention, in Sakkaku, a female protagonist has been used to subvert the use of a dominant male protagonist. There has been, however, current horror films that have a female protagonist. For example, Lights Out, Don't Breathe and Hush and The Other Side of the Door. All these films portray a dominant female rather than a dominant male. In Sakkaku, we also portray our female protagonist as dominant female As in the flashback of the scenes, the female protagonist goes against the Doctor by pushing the Doctor to the side with force and bravery, which connotes how the female protagonist is strong, as the dominant male protagonist would be. Another scene from Sakkaku is with the protagonist grabbing the blade, seeing as it is a chance to kill and defeat the antagonist, connoting the female protagonist is quick-witted and brave. By portraying in Sakkaku how the female protagonist is strong, brave and quick-witted, it is conventional for horror films to portray the dominant male protagonist in the film the same way the female protagonist is portrayed in Sakkaku. This theory does not adhere with the narrative of Sakkaku and also the convention of a dominant male protagonist. The equilibrium theory is a theory of how a narrative would follow the three-part structure that is in order to create a narrative, in this scenario horror films in particular. The first is start with the equilibrium, which is when in the narrative it is balanced and normal.
I've wanted to spend time with you for so long.
Miss you guys!
Mom, we're having a great time.
A disruption is then caused for the balance to become unbalanced.
It's 10:47. We think there's someone outside the door.
This then leads to the last part of the narrative, a resolution, so that the equilibrium is
You need
balanced.
to come right now.
Horror films such as The Visit and The Boy are examples that adhere to this theory. We have challenged this theory as we have started the narrative with a disruption rather than a balanced equilibrium. This is because we wanted to entice our audience at the start, with the protagonist running and constantly looking back as though she's being chased. This then creates the questions by our audience as to the reason to why she is being chased and by who. By not knowing by who, it creates the fear of the antagonist and therefore entices the audience more. By challenging this theory, we have produced a horror film that is unconventional in comparison with current films. The theory, however, can be applied to many forms of media, such as TV programs and music videos. One MV is called Black or White by a K-pop group called Crossgene. At the start of the narrative of the MV, we see one of the members stumbling with his hand on his chest, which then cuts to another member running down the stairs and constantly looking back. This is another example of how the narrative does not fit with Todorov's theory. This MV follows the horror convention, with the excessive use of blood and violence with weapons such as a baseball bat, a scalpel, a hammer and a piece of glass. There was also scenes of drowning with one of the protagonist's own blood and strangulation. Yet this is similar to Sakkaku because of how each of the members was harmed by a copy of themselves, which are the antagonists in the MV. Overall, the narrative of Sakkaku does not adhere to Todorov's theory. Barthes has a theory about how the element of a story or narrative is not fully explained until there is a final scene in the narrative to explain the element. This is a theory Sakkaku adheres to because at the start of the film the equilibrium is imbalanced, with the protagonist running constantly while she's looking back and having flashbacks in between about what has happened to her. Yet it doesn't uncover as to how she got into a situation with the Doctor and is left unanswered. It's an example of how we wanted to keep it unanswered for the audience to decide how and why she had been kidnapped. The ending is also another example of the narrative being left unanswered, as the audience see the antagonist for one moment and then gone. This then leaves a disorder and also a mystery for the audience to think about whether the antagonist was real and had caused the death of the protagonist, or it was the protagonist's own doing. We wanted to keep the narrative as a mystery for the audience to decide and have their intake about the reason to how the protagonist was killed, despite the blade. Narratives capture their audiences by making them want to know what is going to happen next. Lacey, page 72. This quote from a book explains the reason to why we have written the beginning and the end of the film for there to be a mystery. In research, I looked at various horror film posters such as Woman in Black, Don't Breathe and The Last Exorcism, and identified conventions used in these posters. One of the conventions is the date or the phrase coming soon that is placed underneath the title. This is so that the audience would be aware of when the film will be released and mentioning the film will come out with coming soon. By seeing that this is a convention, we have used coming soon also to create enticement of the film, so that the audience would look forward to the film after analysing the poster. The coming soon is in dark yellow colour to match the branches with the sun shining on it. Furthermore, the letters are spaced out, as this is another convention we have seen in the posters. The aim was to produce a poster that has been inspired by how the film industry market their films to target the audience. Another convention is that the characters from the film are featured on the poster, such as the protagonist and antagonist. They are placed either individually or together. Woman in Black is an example that adheres to the convention. This is so the poster introduces the characters from the narrative, but also the actors and the actresses who are starring in it. Therefore, we adhere to this convention and have taken a close-up of our protagonist's eye and one side of her face. We wanted to only capture her eye because the narrative is based on her seeing an illusion throughout. We also placed the antagonist in the center of the protagonist's eye to connote illusion and to show who the protagonist is focusing on. Also the convention of how the titles, credits and the production logo are aligned on the poster. As credits in horror posters is placed underneath the title so that the film title is introduced first. The release date then comes in after the credits. This structure of how they are placed on the poster is how we placed it on Sakkaku. This is because we followed the eye flow of how the audience would analyze posters and advertisements. We also researched for horror radio trailers but did not find any, and therefore had listened to regular trailers without watching it and focusing on just the audio. By listening to Woman in Black, silence was used to create suspense and to build tension for a scream that would be coming up. This is to give an effect of surprise. We had adhered to this convention and had used silence after a scream is fading out.
Sakkaku. A young girl kidnapped, drugged, alone, and nowhere to hide.
This also the abrupt sound of running takes our audience by surprise. Another convention radio trailers use is the voiceover/narration to tell parts of the narrative and introduce the date of the film's release or to tease it with coming soon. We included a voiceover in our radio trailer to give a guideline about what the narrative of Sakkaku is about. This is because we didn't want our audience to feel confused about what is happening in the narrative.
Sakkaku. A young girl kidnapped, drugged, alone, and nowhere to hide.
As there is no dialogue throughout the film. Another reason was to create the mood of horror, with a sudden deep and intimidating voice and then a creepy whisper to set the genre of horror. Furthermore, using a voiceover to introduce the narrative to the audience and to release the release date is conventional in trailers in the industry. We also use a convention of music, played along with our ambient sound. We also use a convention of a length for how long a radio trailer would be heard for. It would be difficult for our audience to be interested throughout the trailer and therefore have kept it short to listen to.